The next chapter specifically discusses reading. Because Thoreau had plenty of time by the lake, aside from enjoying the scenery, reading was a very enjoyable activity. Thoreau said, "Compared to a university, my residence is more conducive to thought and to serious reading, although my reading exceeds the collection of an ordinary circulating library." Why are there so many books? Because Emerson's family had an oversized library, so he often went there to borrow books to read. The poet Mir Kamal Uddin Mast said, "Sitting here, traversing the territory of the spiritual world, I have such a privilege in books. A cup of wine intoxicates me. I enjoy the bliss of drinking profound doctrines. I kept Homer's Iliad on my desk all summer, although I only occasionally glanced at its pages. Initially, I always had endless manual work on hand because I had to finish the house and hoe beans at the same time, making it impossible to read. However, I look forward to being able to read in the future, using this hope to motivate myself. During breaks from work, I read one or two relatively shallow travel books. After that, reading such books made me feel ashamed, and I questioned myself where exactly I were. Thoreau wanted to read the Iliad, but he couldn't muster the enthusiasm. Reading, like writing, must be cautious and restrained. Just knowing the language used in the book is not enough, because there is a significant difference between spoken and written language. Understanding spoken language does not mean you can understand written language. Spoken language is usually temporary, just a voice, a kind of speech, or a dialect, almost like an animal, and we unconsciously learn our mother tongue like an animal. Written language is mature and refined based on spoken language. If we call spoken language our mother tongue, then written language is our father tongue, a reserved and select expression. This language is so important that if our ears can't hear it, we must be reborn to speak it. Think about how we read classical Chinese texts. This is the way we live in our daily life. Classical Chinese is a condensed and refined expression. In fact, we can understand it this way. Classical Chinese in ancient texts is the father tongue, while the vernacular Chinese we express today is perhaps the mother tongue. Most people learn to read for a trivial convenience, just as learning arithmetic is for bookkeeping, to avoid being deceived in business. But as for reading as a noble intellectual activity, they only know a little, or even nothing. From a higher perspective, true reading is not the kind that uses luxury to tempt us, letting our nobler senses sleep all the time, but the kind of reading that we must tiptoe and use our most alert and awake time to engage in. This passage is helpful for us to read Walden. Why have many people read Walden, but very few have finished it? The reason lies in the book's abundant philosophical reflections and extensive repetitive and detailed descriptions. Therefore, if you don't have enough patience and can't understand or empathize with the author, it's really hard to continue reading. But after reading this book so many times, I began to feel that every page you casually open in Walden can bring you tranquility and a quiet enjoyment. The experience reading gives you at this time is different from when you just want to quickly gain something from reading. Well, I hope to meet people who are wiser than those born in our Concord, whose names are unknown here. Could I have heard of Plato's name but never read his books? It's like that Plato is my fellow townsman and my neighbor, and yet I have never met him, or talked with him, or paid attention to the wisdom in his words. It is similar to the reason why we should read Confucius's Analects, Mencius, and Laozi. We have heard of these people, but we should know them, and we should get to know them through their books. If we can truly read and understand, they may be more beneficial to our lives than mornings or springs, and can help us see new aspects of things. How many people have opened up new stages of their lives because of reading a book? Books exist for us. Perhaps they will explain our miracles and reveal new wonders. We boast that we belong to the 19th century, and our development speed was faster than any other country. But think about how insignificant this village's contributions were to its culture. Looking back at America and England in the 19th century, although they developed rapidly at the time, they were certainly still backward compared to today. Thoreau believed that hedonism prevailed at that time, and people were enjoying the thrill of rapid development brought by industrial revolution. He asked, what contributions did we make to culture? Meanwhile, in the chapter Reading, Thoreau felt that universities didn't necessarily have to be at places like Harvard or Yale, and there should be a university in Concord. And we don't necessarily have to farm here. We can print books and hold lectures here. He ended with an interesting statement. We don't want aristocrats. We want noble villagers. So Thoreau and Emerson, especially Emerson, who was a great educator, social activist, poet, and philosopher at the time, were promoting the universalization of education. Next comes the chapter, Sounds. Remember that in Zhuangzi, there were heavenly sounds, earthly sounds, and human sounds. In Walden, this chapter specifically talks about various sounds in the natural world. The sounds Thoreau heard living by the lake were definitely different from what we hear in cities. He said, "What's better than reading? Let's listen. The first summer, I didn't read, and I was busy planting beans. No, I often busied myself with things better than this. Sometimes, in the summer mornings, after my habitual bath, I would sit in front of the sunny door from sunrise until noon, immersed in reverie, surrounded by pine, walnut, and lacquer trees, enjoying undisturbed solitude and quiet, while birds sang around me or quietly flew past my room until the sun shone through my western window, or the distant sound of a traveler's carriage on the highway reminded me that time was passing. I grew up in these seasons. Like corn grows in the evening, such leisure is much more beneficial than any physical labor. This did not waste the time of my life, but greatly extended the life I should have had. Finally, I understand what Easterners advocate, being diligent in contemplation and abandoning mundane tasks. Most of the time, I don't care about how time passes. If you have read Relativity, you will find that time is a unique perception of humanity. If you overly care about the passage of time, you will become very anxious. Some people can only find pleasure from the outside, from socializing and drama. Compared with these people, my lifestyle has at least one advantage, which is that my life itself has become my entertainment and is constantly being renewed.